Welcome to episode 42 of our Life Story podcast, brought to you by the Living Memory Association. In this edition, we're joined by David Franks, who grew up in Hebburn and Jarrow in the 1950s. We hear tales of avoiding the ferocious Alsatians to retrieve footballs at the Wardle factory, adventures at Grange Junior School, the 11 Plus, and a move to Jarrow Grammar. We cover David's appearance at juvenile court, attendance at Newcastle University, and the path from lowly audit assistant to partner at Price Waterhouse. Back in time we go. David Franks, thank you for joining us on Life Story today. We'll start off, can you just tell me a little bit about your parents?
My mum and dad, John Thomas, known as Toma, and Veronica Alexander, known as Vera. And they were at one stage, someone referred to them as the most attractive couple in heaven. And I've got some lovely photographs of them, and they were very hard-working, industrious people, very ordinary jobs that they worked from 9 till 5, but they were very happy.
And did you have much contact with your grandparents growing up, David?
No, my grandmother on my mum's side died when I was 4 or 5. I have no recollection of her really. My granddad died when I was 18. I knew him reasonably well. On my dad's side, my granddad died when I was 8 or 9, and he was apparently quite an isolated man. He kept himself to himself for various reasons I can tell you about. My nana, she I think died in 1974, so I had quite a lot to do with her. In fact, when I was young, she was the one I was closest to. I can remember being taken down from Jarrow to South Shields, so she would go to the lodge where she and her cronies, and that's probably the right word, play cards. I remember sitting in the corner and giving me something to entertain myself, and people could come up and say, "He's a good-looking lad." And she'd say, "Yes, it's my grandson." Then we get the bus back and perhaps get some chips before we went in to a very, very small flat, very dark flat, I remember. But that was nice. She was the one I was closest to.
And in the modern society, there's lots of, these days, the grandparents will often take the kids out. Was it always a case of going to your nana's house, or did she ever come and take you out anywhere?
Well, one recollection of my nana coming into my flat, the flat that we had in Heaven till I was 11, when I was 9. And one morning my mum said, "You're not going to school today, your nana's coming to be with you." And I thought, "Oh, great, brilliant." But she actually took me on the bus to a hospital in Gateshead where I had 40 warts removed from my knee, and that was the reason I was going. I didn't realise why I was going until I was on the bus, and that was quite difficult to say. It was done by a surgeon and injecting stuff into each wart. But anyway, that's my recollection of my nana going out with her. Yes, my other grandparents, no, I didn't go anywhere with them.
And what are your memories of the house you grew up in, David? If you close your eyes and you try to walk around it in your head, what do you see?
Well, until I was 12, we lived in the flat in Heaven where I was born. It was an upstairs flat in Red House Road, 41 Red House Road, and I can visualise walking up the stairs and then swinging round on the banister at the top, and I did that automatically. And 2 small bedrooms, a very small lounge, really small lounge, a small kitchen, but we did have an indoor toilet, which was something in those days, and it was dark.
Can you remember the colour of your front door?
Red. And I was what they call a latchkey child, which meant that when I was still very young, I would come home by myself from junior school and let myself into the house because my mum and dad were working, and of course the key was on the opposite side of the latch, so you put your hand through the letterbox and got the key and went in. The thing was, of course, everyone knew that's what people did in those days. And I did come home one day and I opened the door and there was a poker at the bottom of the stairs. I thought, that's strange. And I went up, and indeed someone had been into the house during that day, and aged 8 I went round the corner to where a policeman lived, and he was off duty, and I knocked his door and explained what was happening. And he came, and by the time my mum and dad came back at, 6:15, there was another policeman there looking around the house. And I remember saying, "Can you take some fingerprints off that fridge?" And he said, "No, we don't do that, son." Such is life.
And what year were you born, David? We've missed that out. What year were you born?
49, 1st of January 1949. And the story is that on New Year's Eve, my mum and dad were at my mum's house in South Shields with her 2 sisters, probably her brother as well, Derek. And my mum started to go into labour, and my nana, Outson, who was quite a tyrant perhaps that's a hard word. She said, off you go, go. You don't want to stay here, don't want to do that. Did I mention that my granddad on my mum's side, her father, was Danish?
No.
Well, he was, and apparently his father came over from Denmark when he was quite young and settled here for whatever reason.
What are your very earliest memories then of your life?
I think I can remember being in a pram at the Jarrow railway station, perhaps going to South Shields with my Auntie Pat, but I wonder if I make that up. I can't remember being at junior school when I was 4 or 5, and actually that would be infant school. Then you progress to junior, and yes, just being at the infant school, sitting in a wigwam in the hall and playing a triangle. I hadn't thought of that for a while.
And what was the town of Hebburn like growing up? What were the surroundings like? Was it a good place to grow up?
An industrial town with some big factories. Just outside the front door there was a huge factory, Baker Perkins. But there were some allotments outside the front door as well. There was a steel mill 100 yards away. Hebburn, that's Hebburn. Of course, Hebburn had railroads where my mum and dad eventually worked. I think my dad worked there most of his life, I think. Jarrow was the most industrial town. It had shipyards. It had some heavy engineering, chemicals. I actually wrote a poem about Jarrow about 6 months ago. I was inspired by reading a poem in Spanish about someone and his return to Cordoba, and I actually didn't think it was very good, and so I thought I'll write a poem about Jarrow, and I did. It took me about an hour, and later, if you wish, I'll read it for you.
Yeah, well, if you could read it, we could maybe put it on the end.
I'll do that. I'll read it and
put
send
it on
it
the end
to
of the
you.
show.
Yes, mm-hmm.
Where did you hang about as a wee boy then? Were there any play parks or football pitches?
In the streets. In the streets. You hang around in the streets, but we had a park whereby that's where the school football team, Jarrow Park, that's where we played, but there's also areas, play areas, swings, etc. And you would go out, and fundamentally there was a game called Delivo. You'd run around the streets with a bunch of boys, and you'd either be in the streets or you'd be in the park kicking a ball around, playing Delivo. There were some railway lines you had to cross. There was a bridge, but you could go over the bridge or you could cross the railway line, and quite often we crossed the railway lines, which these days I would go nuts if any of my grandkids did that.
And what was Delivo? What were the rules of Delivo? How did you play?
It's like having a base whereby you had to run around the streets, you had to contact people. Once they were caught, they had to go to the base, like prison really, in anticipation for future years. You had to go to this base, and you could only be released from the base if someone on your team could get through the opposition and get into the base. And I think they shouted, would you believe?
Delivo!
There it is. Yes.
And what kind of time would you spend with your mum and dad growing up? Would you see them just at weekends, or would you see much of them at all in a play context?
That's a huge regret. During the week, forget holiday time. Well, holiday times when mum and dad were working mainly. We had one holiday abroad. It was in Dinard in France. I got some lovely photographs of that. I must have been about 9 or 10, and that was the only time I'd ever been in an airplane. I don't even know if I had a passport. But no, during the week, mum and dad would be out at work. Oh, I think my mum must have started work again when I was 5 or 6. And I remember that for some time, say a year or so, because it was too early for me to go to school, the Grange Junior School, which was about, let's say, 3/4 of a mile away, I would go and sit in the flat downstairs with the people who had daughters older than me. And I remember just sitting on a chair, watching them as they went about their morning routine, getting ready to get out and go to school. And eventually I just slide off the chair and go out and go to school. But these days, that would be, for someone that age, that would be just off the wall, unacceptable. But
yeah.
It was just what you did.
And when you're growing up, I take it your mum cooked the meals, did she?
Cooked them in about 1/4 of an hour from getting in. She would get in at, let's say, 5:45, and at 6 o'clock there would be a meal there. Or she often made a big pot of soup, thick soup. She'd make that at the beginning of the week, and something that terrified me, called a pressure cooker. It whistled, and you always had the thought that the thing was going to explode because of the pressure. Anyway, she made that at the beginning of the week, and I would dip into that when I came home. Or she'd get in, and then say within a few minutes she'd have a meal ready, which I never quite understood.
And what food did you eat then that you don't eat now?
Meat pie. She made a homemade meat pie and a homemade fruit pie, and I was a corned beef and beans man. And frankly, when you say not now, I'm still a corned beef and beans man when push comes to shove. Soup, corned beef, beans, fish fingers, chips. Ah, yes, what is it she made me eat on a Sunday that I choked over? Not suet, something like that, but it was pretty unpleasant.
Do you ever have tripe?
No, we couldn't afford tripe. No. Yes.
And can you tell me about your earliest friendships? Can you remember your earliest pals?
Duncan. Met him at 4. That must have been at the infant school. And Duncan's been my longest friend. In fact, I spoke to him literally just yesterday. And I've been on holiday with Duncan a lot. We were pals for years, well, close pals, until he moved away. And my first memory is on his 5th or 6th birthday. Let's say 10 people there. And there were jelly and ice cream and cream, and someone started throwing stuff around and making a mess, and that person was taken home by his ear by Mrs. Bain, who grabbed a hold of his ear and marched him home to his mum. And Mrs. Bain died just 2 or 3 years ago in a nursing home in Hebburn, but I would call and see her, and her name was Bertie, but I could never really bring myself to call her Bertie. She was always Mrs. Bain, and she was a German extract. She'd been a German lady who married a British soldier and came back here, and very good memory, exceptional memory, and we would talk about that and laugh at that. And there are other instances with Duncan, other schoolboy friends I played football with, Alan Adair, Robin Newlove, Brian Hunter, all names.
Still in touch with any of these guys? Are they still around?
Well, no, but I have started in recent years to try and reach out to a few people. There's one chap called Peter Byram who went through school with me, and he now lives in America, and I've been in quite a lot of touch with him, and it's fun. He's lived in America for 40 odd years, and it's fun to catch up with what's happened to our lives. Unfortunately, quite a few of my schoolboy friends have died. My tennis pal was Jeff Allison, and he died 5 or 6 years ago, if not a little bit longer. And I spoke to him just a day or two before he died, and I went to his funeral down in the south near London, and I'd sent a message to his wife, Sue, who was at school with us as well. She was in our class at school, and it was quite a heartfelt message about Jeff's booming laugh. And at the ceremony, the minister read that out, and it was very touching. And another pal was George Robinson, who again with me throughout school, and George moved away, but we kept in touch. Then he moved to America as well, Newfoundland, and he came over here about 6 or 7 years ago with his wife, and we met in Glasgow. He came to Glasgow to see me, which was fantastic, and we spent a day and a half tripping around, chatting, laughing, and then he went back, and unfortunately he died 2 years ago now. But I'm in touch with his wife. I'm in touch with Sue as well. I like to keep in touch with people. His wife Maureen, this is George, and of course there have been other people who've gone, and others I don't know. I have thought about organising a reunion, but those things are just too difficult to do, so a telephone works, but that's life.
And we touched on Duncan's birthday party there. Can you remember any of your own birthday parties?
I can. Yeah. Of course, it was New Year's Day, so I can remember them very specifically. I've got photographs of when we were in the flat in Hebburn, and yes, indeed, I can picture the people there. There'd be Malcolm, there'd be Duncan, there'd be Harry, there'd be Johnny, Edwin, all people who lived in the lane, as it were, where I grew up and played football.
And what about presents at birthday or Christmas? Are there any that really stick out from your childhood? Things that you got that were spectacular?
How young? Yes.
Just anything from sort of 5 up to 12.
Well, 5, 6, 7. One was a game. It was fundamentally a box with magnets underneath it, and it had roads marked out on it. You could move cars by moving this lever. I mean, how basic can you get? But it was intriguing. It was intriguing.
And did you feel any sense of injustice that your birthday and Christmas were very close together? Did you feel that you lost out at all by that?
The phrase "that'll do you for your birthday, son," rings many chords. Yes, yes, but that's fine. That's the way it was. I never placed great store in it, and as you might even know, my memory about my own children's birthdays now is not the best. But such is life.
And apart from the kind of street games, what other outdoor games did you play as a child? You were a footballer, weren't you?
Football. You played football in the back lane. You played tennis against somebody's wall, the gable end. Will you go and play outside your own house, son? Is a phrase that brings to my mind. And in the back lane, you played against doors. It was called doors. Or you played between sinks in the middle of the lane, which were goals. And there was the infamous Wardle factory. If your ball went over into their backyard, then it took a brave man to go in there, because they had 2 Alsatians that they kept, and they pretended to be asleep, but they weren't. And I remember once going in, I was about to make the last jump down into the yard to retrieve the ball that I'd kicked in, because whoever kicked it in had to get it back. And I looked, and one of the dogs just opened his eyes and looked at me, and I thought, no, I'll just leave that. It wasn't my ball, so I didn't care. Yeah.
And did you play much organised football? Was there a team at your primary or your first school?
Well, I played junior school, and there's a story that I like. When I was 9, so we played in the under-11s. So when I was 9, one Friday, Mr. Craig, who organised the school football team, came into the class and said, "Mrs. Jenkins, who's the tallest boy in class?" Everyone sat up and said, "Well, it's either David or Johnny or Ken." So he said, "Well, stand up." So we all stood up, and I shaded it by an inch or 2. He said, "Right." He said, we're short of a footballer for tomorrow." He said, "I need to come down a year. David, you play. You're in the team for tomorrow." Absolutely brilliant, fantastic. So I was the hero at what we called playtime and lunchtime. I was the hero. Only one problem was I went home that Friday night, and I knew he was talking about I didn't have any football boots. But not to worry, I thought, Johnny's got football boots. So you go around, you shout up, "Johnny, Johnny, are you coming out?" Didn't come. "Johnny, Johnny, will you leave him alone? He's having his tea." So you persist. "Johnny," that was his mum. "Johnny, Johnny, are you coming out?" So Johnny came. "Johnny, can I wear your football boots for tomorrow? They're being repaired, having new studs put in." Panic set in. Edwin didn't have any football boots. I couldn't think of anything else. So instead of telling my mum and dad, who I'm sure could have sorted something out, I just sweated all night. And the next morning I went along, and you had to be there, I'd say at 10 o'clock. And I lost my nerve. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I lost my nerve. And I hid behind a bush, and I could see Mr. Craig looking for me to come. And I didn't arrive because I just didn't know what else to do. I didn't show up. And so Monday morning I went into school, and I went up to him. I said, "I'm really sorry about the weekend." Perhaps I didn't say it as eloquently as that. "I'm sorry about the weekend. I couldn't get there." "Why is that?" "My gran died." It's the best I could think of at the time. And actually over the time she died quite a few times to get me out of a hole.
And what was the name of your primary school?
Grange Junior School.
And do you remember anything about your first day there, or the early days?
Early days walking there. I think my mum would take you at the beginning, and you'd walk there, you'd meet people on the way. As I say, it was only 3/4 of a mile, if that. And then later on, I got a bike, and I would take that bike down to school. Didn't need to, but I had a bike, so you had to show it off. It was a blue Palm Beach, and you didn't...
Sorry, would that be a racer or a chopper type thing?
Let's not be silly. No,
what would it look like, though?
Very sedate Miss Daisy type bike.
Almost, right. Sort of delivering bread in the basket sort of bike.
There you go. That's about it, yes. And I remember the night I got that, my mum said they were getting it for Christmas for me, and we had to go down. In those days, you didn't go in and buy the bike. They had to service it and put it together. It took 3 or 4 days after you ordered it. So we went down. There was this beautiful Palm Beach bike sitting in the window, and they said they'd see me there after school. And the intention was I'd go home and I'd walk into Jarrow, about a mile or so. But instead of going home, I walked straight down. It was December and it was snowing. And I remember I stood outside for an hour in the snow looking at this bike until eventually they arrived, etc. And then I don't know quite what they did to service it, but it took that time to arrive.
And your days at junior school, were they happy memories? And also, were you a bit of a troublemaker, or were you a good boy?
I was funny. At least I thought I was funny. I was flippant and cheeky, a bit like Luke, really, actually. Flippant and cheeky. You didn't get into any trouble then in junior school. Senior school was a wee bit different, but junior school, no, it was fine. Happy, yes, they were happy, but I do remember you spent a lot of time by yourself because your friends were working. But that was fine. In the main, that was fine.
Was there no sign of the belt or the strap or an equivalent at junior school?
There's a threat from my dad and mum. There was a threat of the brush. It never materialised I'm not sure it existed. And it did exist, actually. It was a hairbrush, the back of a hairbrush. And it was just a phrase that they would use. You'll get the brush. But I mean, I started to laugh at that at the end because I knew it wasn't serious. In the junior school, I can't honestly recall. I didn't. Well, not that I can recall having it. I had the stick in the senior school, but you can come to that if you want.
Yeah.
No, it was fundamentally a happy time. There was little pressure. The subjects you studied or were taught were pretty basic. Maths, sums, English, grammar. I don't think there was any science. Music. I say there was a triangle. That was it. Playing football in the schoolyard. That was it.
And were you a member of any youth organisations like the BBs or the Scouts or anything?
My dad was a pretty senior guy, I think, in the Boys Brigade. I never did. No, that's not true now. Actually, I went for some time to the Life Boys at the church, but I didn't really enjoy that, so I stopped going there. I never quite understood what it was about. You had a hat. You had to have a hat which had a band on. I think it said Life Boys. Later on, but not then. But no, as a junior, it involved just going to school, football. We didn't have homework at all. I can't recall ever getting homework. It didn't exist. Did it? Well, if it did, I didn't do it.
And moving on to your secondary school, or what would you call it?
The grammar school.
The grammar school.
Of course,
What was it called?
Jarrow Grammar School. You had to take the 11 plus exam, of course, to do that. And I can't recall whether the school nominated people to go or everyone got the chance. I just can't remember. I would hope everyone got the chance. Do you know, that's not right, because it was only one exam and we actually took it at the grammar school. I think the school nominated people, which is terrible really in terms of lost opportunities for so many people, but I think that's the way it worked. And that was the local grammar school, which was excellent, really good. Before then, at the same age, 3 of us had tried out for senior schools, private schools. Now, where my mum and dad were getting the money from, I've no idea. The Royal Grammar School, where Martin eventually went, and Dame Allen's school in Newcastle. And I remember the Royal Grammar School, I didn't pass the written test, but I did pass the Dame Allen's written test, and you had to go subsequently then for an interview with your parents. And as you drove up, you're just surrounded by rugby pitches. So I passed the written test, as I keep emphasising, and the interview was for your parents and for yourself. And there was a killer question. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I said instantaneously, a footballer or a clerk. Mum and Dad were clerks. Didn't go down too well. And coming back, I said to Duncan, that was a tricky question. He said, not really. I said, what do you say? He said, I want to be a doctor in the RAF. I said, wow, where did that come from? He said, I don't know, I just made it up. It sounded really good. None of us got in. Wesley Dickinson got in. I never saw him again, really.
And new friendships at your grammar school? Which new friendships developed in the early days?
I've mentioned Jeff Allison and George, the boys on the football team. Could name them, of course.
What about romances then, David? Early romances at secondary school? Any memories of those?
Yeah.
Wow.
Annette Mole. Not the best name, I suppose, but Annette Mole, yes. She must have been 14. I would go out walking with her, but I would always take my neighbour's dog, Mickey, which seems now a bit bizarre, but it seemed quite a cool thing to do at the time. Getting him on a train was tricky, I remember that. And I also, I must have been a bit older, I also dated a girl called Maureen McCretton twice. Now Maureen was the beauty, the absolute beauty of the year. And we went to the pictures once and somewhere else. And then I was a pretty cool dude in school and the class and the group for having dated Maureen. I must have been 15 or so. And then one recess break, stopped calling it playtime, break. I did call it once in class. I'll do that in playtime, which caused me some embarrassment. Anyway, her friend Ginger came up and in front of all my pals said, David. I said, yeah, hi, how are you doing? She said, you're dumped. What? Maureen's dumping you. Okay, well, that's fine. She hadn't told me in front of everybody, but so be it.
And what were your best subjects at the grammar school?
When I'd been in the junior school, I was literate and numerate for my age, so quite clever, let's call it clever. When I went to the grammar school, we moved house, and I got in with new people who didn't necessarily go to the grammar school, and I lost all focus on academic work. So instead of being a clever boy, I went in the second year, which was graded, I went into the bottom form, 2E, and I'm not even sure I told my mum and dad that. And these days they probably wouldn't know. And I wasn't trying. And I went through the third year as well. And I decided enough was enough, and I started working there. I moved up, and my best subjects I was most interested in were history and English. Maths I never quite got. Algebra, geometry never really rang a bell with me. A watershed time in the fourth year, or it might have been the third year, about the fourth year, we had to do an essay, and for some reason I put effort into this essay, and Mrs. Forth came round and she was handing out back the essay, the books, and in full hearing of the whole class she said, "David, that was really good, well done." Now, arguably that might have been the first real praise you'd had, but the motivational effect was fantastic. So well done, Mrs. Forth.
It sounds to me like you're more of a cheeky, funny character at school, but what was the most trouble that you got into at school? Remember the biggest incident? Was there one? What was the most forbidden thing that you ever did?
During the first year, at the end of the first year, you had term exams or yearly exams, and in those days you had ink and blotters, and we're doing something, and the boy next to me, whose name I can't remember, at the back of the class said, David, and he wanted to know some answer to some maths question, and he said, blotter. So I wrote it on the blotter, and he said, "Sir, can I borrow David's blotter?" So the teacher, the boy on the other side saw this as well. The idiot said, Sir, can I borrow David's blotter? Now the teacher wasn't totally daft, and he came down, he saw that. We were both, or three of us, were sent off to the headmaster, and I think I got the stick, or the cane as we called it then. Yes, phrases like "it wasn't my fault" didn't cut my choice. But I was in juvenile court. We'd moved to this really nice house in York Avenue, Jarrow. How we got that is another story if you want to know.
Yeah.
And got into this bunch of boys, and Guy Fawkes was coming around, and what we were doing was we're collecting wood from wherever we could find it and storing it on a school roof. It was a flat roof, which in itself is not, you trespassed on the school grounds, but you were just storing the wood. And I remember that one of the boys pulled off a drain pipe as we were trying to climb up the store. Why we stored it up there, I have no idea, but we did. And the drain pipe came off, and another one threw something which went through a window, which wasn't the best thing. Anyway, the police came. I don't think it was a siren. I think we saw the police coming, and we scrambled down. I remember I ran across the schoolyard and vaulted, never done that in my life before, vaulted over this barrier and went home. I'm sitting there doing my homework, industriously keeping my head down, and about 10 o'clock there was a knock on the door, and it was the police, and we were charged subsequently with trespass, and something damaged us. 6 of us had to go to juvenile court. Mum and Dad were mortified, but it's no big, if you think about it, it's no big deal.
So they took it quite well, did they, Mum and Dad? You still didn't see the brush?
No, the brush didn't come out, but I do remember standing there, and we were reprimanded by wouldn't be a judge, by the, whatever it was. Let's call him a judge, that's more sonority to it. And anything to say, "No sir, no sir, no sir," until one of the guy's father spoke up and said, "Well, in a broad Geordie accent, well, all I can say is that drain pipe must have been bloody loose for it to come off." And I just put my head down, And then we had to go back to school. I don't remember why, but we had to go and admit to, I was the only one in the grammar school, had to go and admit to the headmaster what had happened. I don't know why that happened. I could have just kept quiet and said I had a cold, but I did. And he was all right, he understood.
And when did you leave school? What school year did you leave in?
I did the 5th year, my O-levels, and then I did 2 years A-levels, and I left when I was 18. My dad had died very suddenly in late January just after I'd turned 18. I took my A-levels just a few months after then. So 18.
And did you feel immediate responsibility to be the man of the house, or?
Well, that could be a very loaded question, because it's exactly how I felt. That's when I think I never quite stopped being a cheeky chappy, but that's when I started to realise responsibility. This is going to sound very virtuous, but my granddad, my mum's father, died in mid-January. My dad died at the end of January, and I was taking my A-levels and due to go away to Manchester University. I had a place that year, but I decided, this is where the virtuousness comes into it, I decided I really couldn't do that to my mum. So I stayed at home and I worked for a year, and I went to the Newcastle University the year after.
And how did your path unfold after that?
I'd worked this 1 year at this small accounting firm. I wanted to be an accountant. Why? I remember telling my nana, my dad's mum, I wanted to be an accountant. Hey son, you can do better than that. No, that's a good job. No, she thought an accountant was like a cashier who sat in bins and took your money from you. And so I worked for a year at the small firm, left there, there's a story in itself there, and went to uni for 3 years, then joined this magnificent firm, Price Waterhouse, and went on from there.
And were your university days, are they happy memories of those days?
Yeah, I was engaged to Beryl for 2 of them.
Where did you meet Beryl?
At the Club Go-Go in South Shields, as you do.
And were you a good dancer?
In my own mind. Northern Soul. Northern Soul lives.
So did you approach her across the did you swagger across the dance floor to ask her
I was there
to
with
dance?
Duncan, and Beryl was there with Jerry, her cousin, and a really good friend. And being cool dudes, what you did was you took it in turn to decide which girl you were going to ask. We saw these 2. It was my turn. And of course, I chose Beryl. And of course, the joke was, if it had not been my turn, I could have ended up with Jerry. Who's a very nice girl, by the way. Yes.
And from there, from that first night at the dance, what was your first date after that with Beryl? Can you remember?
Next night, I think, really. Next night. How old would I be? 18. I just left school. 18. I was super cool. I had access to a car. Does it get any better?
Can you remember where you went on that first date? Was it the pictures or?
Went for a drink at the Crown Hotel on the seafront in South Shields.
You weren't still taking the dog with you at that point, were you?
Mickey had died. Did I not mention that?
No.
Yeah. No, I'd moved on from that. That was.
And do you remember what you'd be drinking at that point? What you'd both be drinking?
I think if it wasn't that night, I think Beryl used to drink brandy and baby sham, which I didn't have any money. I might be making that up, but it's better as a made-up story. What I'd be drinking? Scotch, I think, because it sounds cool. That's beer, by the way, not whiskey.
So from your university career comes to an end and you go back into the world of work, how did that unfold?
Again, there's always a story. Because I'd worked this year for this small accounting firm, I'd done 1 year of what they called articles, debenture, whatever they called it in those days, and you had to do 3-year articles as a graduate. So I only had 2 years to do, and so I sat, this is going to sound very...
So what's an article in layman's terms? What?
Debenture, training contract they call it these days.
Okay.
And I had it in my head that I'd wasted this year of my life with this small accounting firm, which I had done, of course. And so I sat you had 2 exams to take, part 1 and part 2. And I took the part 1 in November after I joined the previous year in August. And then what you had to do was wait from November you had to wait another 17 months to take the part 2. But there was a very obscure rule that you could take the part 2 any time in your last 6 months of your article, of your training contract. And I had it in my head that I wanted to try and recoup this time. So the day we got the results, I had a tentative plan. The day we got the results, I went and spoke to the partner, Mr. Peter Jarrett, bless him, and told him I really wanted to take this exam a year early. And his words were, I remember he just looked at me smilingly and said, smiling you'll realise was a joke, absolutely not. No chance, you have no chance of success. It will be extremely detrimental to your career and I would not support this. Well, that seems fairly clear. But being a persistent sort of thing, I went back to him, which is, again, a story. And he lost patience with me and said, do what the hell you like. Oh, that's okay. Thank you very much. So I recouped that year. I mean, I got through that exam by the skin of my teeth, which was ridiculous. And I recouped that year. And I think that was very good for me because it sort of marked you down as a little bit different. Someone who was prepared to put their head foolishly on the block, which I did.
I know you worked incredibly hard over your work life and retired relatively early. In those early days at Price Waterhouse Coopers, in your mind, did you think, was that always the plan, to work your way right to the top?
Yeah. It was called Price Waterhouse in those days, and we merged with Coopers many years later. It was. I have a photograph of when Beryl and I moved into our first flat. We're painting a wall, and in those days they referred to the partners by their initials. And with this big roller, I'd put on DJF. That was my ambition, to be DJF. And I gave myself a target date, which was anticipating recouping that year, which I did. And that sounds, it doesn't sound arrogant, it was a fact. So yes, that was always my ambition. A lot of people would join with the intention of getting some experience and then moving off, but I wanted to be a partner in this firm.
And you started a family during that time. I know you've got 3 lovely children. Had you always wanted to have kids from a young age? And how did you take to parenthood?
You don't think about it. I was working a lot. How did Beryl take to it? I think is more appropriate. No, you can't say. I mean, ever since getting married, children were obviously there. And once I was qualified, then that was the thing to do. I mean, Price Waterhouse Partners had 3 children, dogs and a cat. And I had 3 children, 2 dogs and a cat. That was what you had to do. It was the law.
And early memories of playing with your kids, taking them out? What are those memories?
Memories of pushing Martin around the streets, the first, of course, in his pushchair in the evenings, and talking to him around the street, and the estate where we lived, talking to him there. Memories of Kathy walking in the park, and she wanted to cross these stones across a little, not a river, a little stream. And I said, "Don't, Kathy, don't, you'll fall in." "I want to." "Don't, you'll fall in." "I want to." "All right, on you go." Clop, clop, splash. "Daddy, I'm all wet. Michael was always a wee bit different. He was interested in making things and doing things that I couldn't do. I couldn't make that. So they're all different. Excellent. Mm-hmm.
You have a great relationship with your kids these days. What do you think is your bond? What bonds you with these 3 quite different individuals?
As a group, I love them.
Where do you connect in modern times with your kids, do you think?
I am amused or bemused by the fact that now, at the time when they were younger, of course, you're the adult and you say we're doing X, Y and Z.
Mm.
And now it's turned, and they're all very strong-willed in different ways, but equally well, they care hugely for you, and they will do anything for you in their own way. You just have to ask, or sometimes you don't have to ask, and they'll take the initiative. I think just recognising that we're a family, and that's what you do. And I know a lot of people don't do that, but we were fortunate, and that's the mentality we've got.
What do you remember about family holidays when you were younger?
I can remember we'd go to Mallorca or Minorca with Ted and Anne and their family, and we do that quite a lot. We went to Portugal a lot, Playa de Luz, 2 or 3 times at least. I remember the first time we went to America, I turned up at the airport in my suit because I came straight from the office. I'd been in doing some work in the morning, which wasn't the best thing to do. So we went to Florida, and that was just like party time. That was incredible. The size of the pizzas were colossal, absolutely colossal. We had some good holidays. We, as I say, often with Ted and Anne and their kids.
And your job with Price Waterhouse took you abroad as well?
Not to work as such until I got to a level where I went and lived abroad with them. You worked in the UK, mostly in the northeast, but in the UK, occasionally you'd go to Europe if you had a reason for a particular client. But when I was a manager with the firm, I was offered to go on what they called the International Service Programme or Managers Exchange Programme, and I went for 2 years to live and work in Kuwait. And at that point, Beryl and I had Martin and Catherine. I came back had Michael. He was born after we got back. And I spent 2 years there travelling around the Middle East, working in Kuwait, but travelling around the Middle East. It was exciting, it was brilliant, astonishing.
And you retired at 52, which is relatively young. Again, was that always the plan, to retire young, or when did you have those first thoughts of thinking, I've had enough of this?
It wasn't so much because I loved it until the day I left the office or the firm. But two things. I always had a thought that I would go at 55. You had to retire at 60. But they had an early retirement program. I've been a partner since 1983, and during 2000, my mind was focused on this in the sense that, well, what's the difference between 55 and 52, etc. And I also then, at the time, which is solved now, but I had a problem called atrial fibrillation, which caused me some distress, and that put pressure on, and I thought, to heck with it, let's just do this. And I remember once walking back, this may not survive the recording, but I remember walking back from seeing a consultant at one of the hospitals in Glasgow. It moved then, obviously, from Newcastle in 1986. That's right. I remember walking back in the snow. It must have been December 2000, and I thought, no, this is a message to you too. It wasn't so much the fibrillation didn't come on as a result of any stress from working. It just came on medically. But I thought, no, enough's enough. So I thought of a Christmas. I talked about it with Ted and Anne. I talked about it with my best friend in the firm, my ex-boss, Bill Teasdale from Newcastle, and decided to do that. And so it was quite a thing. And I think it must have been February. I notified the partnership that I wanted to leave that summer, and that was good.
How did it feel to walk out of that building for the last time?
Not as bad as you would think, as you might think. I mean, I'd had various leaving dues and clients and office, etc. But on the last day, I think it had to be the 30th of June, at about, you'd passed over all your clients, you'd done everything you had to do, closed your computer effectively, so had nothing to do. I remember I just walked around the office one more time, and then instead of walking back to my own room, there's a little side door that took you down the garage. I just slipped into that and just went home. It was funny. It was, everyone who retires will have different memories. But for me, waking up the next morning, can't think what day it was, but not having to go to work and no work to go to is more important. And I'd also decided I didn't want to do any different type of work. I loved the job, say, until the day I left. I didn't want to do any different type of work, consulting or whatever. And that was quite strange. People said, oh, you'll miss this, that and the other, you'll miss the responsibility, you'll miss the charge. Not really. You know what I'm going to say. I miss the people. You miss your friendships, but they've persisted, they've continued on. A lot of good friends in the firm. People older, younger, my age, that's continued. And I was just grateful that I could have the chance to do it.
And that life of leisure that you've lived ever since, a lot of people obviously have great difficulties adjusting to that life, but you seem to have been all right. How have you filled your time?
I took up golf, and when I left, I took up curling and bridge, and both of them stopped quite soon. I'd go to curling, and people, it was cold at night time, we'd go out, people just shouted you to sweep, sweep. I didn't like being shouted at, so I stopped that. And I went to bridge, and people would shout at you there as well. They were all supposedly beginners, but they weren't. They went along, and they were clever bridge players, and they made mistakes. And why did you do that? Well, I don't know. So I gave up those, and I took up golf. I'd taken up golf just before, a few months before I retired. I took to that hugely. I loved it. I still do. And within a few months, I got down to a handicap of 17, which I thought, this is my game. I am the man. I can do this. And now playing up 26, that wasn't the case, but it doesn't matter. I love it. It's great.
And you're probably too modest to say, but you have taken on an awful lot of projects and helped an awful lot of people since you've retired, haven't you?
I've never... modesty?
You maybe wouldn't call them
modesty?
Projects.
No, a project is my thing. Modesty, no. I've helped quite a lot of people by using my Price Waterhouse, PricewaterhouseCoopers experience in terms of business matters, business problems, business issues, project. But what I really enjoyed when I was in Newcastle, I was the staff partner of the office for 3 years, and I loved that. I really loved that, and I continued that interest when I came to Glasgow, and therefore helping people prepare for interviews, prepare their CVs, prepare just to try and win in getting a job. I've done that a lot. It started out for friends or family, and then it never mushroomed in this. I didn't do a huge number of projects, if I can call it that. but some of them were really rewarding, and it was amazing how, with just a little bit of thought, people can improve their performance in interviews 100%, and give them that, take the mystique out of it and stop them saying silly things, and how to say things that are interesting and attractive. It's a game. You have to win that game. Mm-hmm.
You seem content and at peace with where you are in life now.
Hugely.
Do you have any regrets?
Regrets, I have a few, but they're again too few to mention. Is that right? Is that so?
You can leave it at that if you like.
Yes, we'll do that.
And finally, David, what would you like to be your epitaph? I mean, how would you like to be remembered? What does it say on the David... I mean, on the off chance that you don't live forever, what does it say on the David Franks gravestone?
In a Geordie accent, it would say he was a good lad.
David, thank you very much for joining us on Life
Pleasure.
Story.
Pleasure. While Bede sleeps on. Okay, but to begin with, some necessary background for readers who are not from Newcastle. St. Bede has a monastery in Jarrow, and Palmer was a local businessman who had shipyards and built a charity hospital. Jarrow and South Shields were invaded by Vikings, and surely everyone knows of the Jarrow March, where they went to London to demand work, but unsuccessfully. As Bede sleeps on. Where Bede still lies, the ships were born and the sons of Palmer toiled. The salt pans freely gave up their gold, while the coal had to be torn from the earth by men of honest endeavour but rotting lungs. Came the pirate raids from the men of Thor, a prince in name alone. Bede's home was sacked without defence. The ruins, once smouldering, stand to this day. Jarrovians had no reply save to accept the invaders' terms. Abject surrender, pride, counts for naught here. But sons of Jarrow did not stay down, and the nation's revolution did not pass by. And men of drive and purpose once more laid foundations strong, men of muscle fighting the stone, hard coal in the dark, while the canary sang and the donkey treaded on. Glass, ships and chemicals called sons and daughters from their morning beds. But later still, as Bede slept on, 10,000 souls left the yard, never to return. There is no work, we need support. These still proud townsfolk complained, and so began the long, slow march, demanding help and jobs. 300 miles to alien parts, the South as it was called, the proud crusaders walked to beg. My abuela was there, claims every true son, well in spirit if not on foot. With what success you cannot say, but still it lives today, a place to live, not now so much to work, while Bede sleeps on.
If you've enjoyed the show, our full range of podcasts can be accessed via our website at www.livingmemory.org.uk, where you can find Leith Lives, Live Story, Analog Rory's Jukebox, the Thelma tapes, and a celebration of 78 RPM records called Forgotten Songs from the Broom Cupboard. Our YouTube channel at the Living Memory Association is also packed with great resources to help spark memories and conversation. And you can follow us on Twitter at Thelma Scotland. Finally, if you're in Edinburgh, pop along to see our wee Museum of Memory at Ocean Terminal Leith on the top floor beside Britannia. Here we host thousands of objects from the past, and there's all sorts of things to spark brilliant memories. Until next time, we bid you farewell.